Background: Gwen Araujo was born on February 24, 1985 in Brawley, California. Her parents, Eduardo Araujo Sr. and Sylvia Guerrero, divorced when Gwen was 10 months old. When Gwen was 14 years old in 1999, she came out as transgender. She began using the name Gwen after her favorite singer, Gwen Stefani. She planned to undergo hormone therapy and a sex reassignment surgery. Because of this, she was bullied throughout junior high because of who she was. She transferred to an alternative school but had dropped out of school just before the 2002-2003 school year had begun. Towards the end of August or early September 2002, Gwen met Michael McGidson, Jose Merrill, Jaron Neighbors, and Jason Cazares. She flirted with all four men, and they smoked weed together. After Gwen left, Jaron Neighbors asked the three other guys if Gwen was a guy. But none of the four men took the question seriously. Gwen came back to where the four men were located. She performed oral sex on Michael McGidson and anal sex on Jose Merrill. But when it came to the men wanting to have vaginal sex with Gwen, she said she's on her period and she would push her partner's hands away from her genitals to prevent them from finding out she had a penis. A young woman named Nicole Brown who was dating Paul Merrill was acquainted with Gwen and had gotten into a physical fight after Nicole challenged Gwen to strip for the men. Gwen had hit Nicole with such a strong force during the fight. Nicole said that she was taken back because Gwen was smaller than her but was physically stronger than her. In late September, the four men began questioning whether Gwen was a female and they said something bad can happen to her if she is not a female. October 3 to October 4, 2002, Gwen is confronted. On October 3, 2002, Gwen went to a house party, in which the house was rented by Jose and Paul. They, along with their younger brother Emmanuel Merrill, Michael McGidson, Jaron Neighbors, Jason Cazares, and Nicole Brown were all in attendance. Jaron later testified that Jose Merrill said that night, "I swear, if it's a fucking man, I'm gonna kill him. If it's a man, she ain't gonna leave." According to Neighbors, McGidson added, "I don't know what I'm going to do." And Neighbors replied, "Whatever you do, make sure you don't make a mess." During the early morning hours of October 4, Michael had asked Gwen to reveal her gender or allow him to touch her genitals, which she refused. Nicole suggested the men should inspect Gwen, and Michael took Gwen to the bathroom. A half an hour later, Jose confessed he had sex with Gwen. Nicole went into the bathroom and she discovered Gwen had a penis during forced inspection. Nicole had blurted, "It's a fucking man." The men who Gwen had a sexual relationship with became very violent and enraged. Nicole testified that she warned Gwen that the men were very angry. Gwen exited the house through its front door, but she was confronted and forced back inside the house by Michael, Jaron and Jason. Emmanuel Merrill testified that he also tried to escort Araujo away from the house, but was prevented by McGidson and Neighbors. Jose Merrill had thrown up after finding out that Gwen was biologically male, and cried in disbelief saying, "I can't be fucking gay." Nicole testified that she tried to comfort Jose after the discovery and told him to let Gwen go. After Gwen was brought back into the house, Michael grabbed at her skirt and underwear, trying to expose her genitals. He punched her in the face, in which she was knocked onto the ground, and attempted to put her in a chokehold, but he was pulled off of Gwen by other attendees. Gwen begged the men to stop, saying, "No, please don't. I have a family." Jose became angry and struck her in the head with a can of food, denting the can and opening a cut on her head. And then he struck her again with a frying pan. The last words that Jose heard Araujo say were, "I told you I was sorry." After this had occurred, Nicole woke up Paul and they left the house with Emmanuel. Jaren and Jason left in Michael's truck to get a shovel and a pickaxe from Jason's house, saying as they left the Merrill house that the other men were going to kill that bitch. Nicole recalled that, after she had left with Paul Merrill, they drove around the block and returned to the house to see neighbors and Cazares leaving in Magiddson's truck. Gwen is murdered. Gwen was conscious by the time Jaren and Jason returned to the house. However, she was bleeding from her head wound. Jose became concerned that Gwen was still bleeding and told her to get up from the couch she was laying on. Jaren and Jason had told the others who were still at the house to knock the bitch out. Michael hit her head against the living room wall with his knee, which left her unconscious. Michael's assault on Gwen was so severe, it had left a dent in the wall and cracked the plaster after Gwen was knocked unconscious. Michael bound her wrists and ankles. Then she was wrapped in a comforter to minimize the amount of blood staining the carpet, before being carried to the garage of the home. This is where the four men's testimonies start to change. Jaren testified that Michael strangled her with a rope and Jason struck her with a shovel. But Jaren was returning from the garage and did not witness this act. On the other hand, Michael testified that it was Jaren who strangled her and struck her with the shovel. And Jason testified that he did not strike her and see her die. It is unknown when she died during this time of events, but her autopsy shows that she died from being strangled along with blunt force trauma to the head. Gwen was placed in the bed of a pickup truck and the four men drove her body 4 hours away. They buried her in a shallow grave in the El Dorado National Forest, which is located near the Sierra Mountains near Silver Fork Road in El Dorado County. After they buried her, they picked up breakfast at a McDonald's. Later on that morning, Nicole had a phone conversation with Jose. She asked what happened to Gwen after Nicole left the party, in which Jose says, "Let's just say she had a long walk home." Arrests, trials, sentencing and aftermath. Gwen usually checked in with her mom, Sylvia. So when she did not come home the day after the party, Sylvia called the police on October 5 to report her missing. The police did not initially take this report seriously, partly because she was transgender and she was known to stay away from home overnight. Later on, rumors began spreading in the community that a girl who was publicly outed as transgender was killed and buried near Tahoe. Gwen's aunt called the police on October 9 to pass on this story. Police interviewed the party's attendees, one of whom led the police to the Merrill house 2 days after Gwen was reported missing. A friend of Jaren's described him as distraught. Jaren confessed to that friend what happened to Gwen shortly after visiting her gravesite. That friend alerted the police about what they had heard, and agreed to wear a microphone during a conversation with Jaren about the murder. On October 15, Jaren was confronted by law enforcement with the recording and he agreed to lead authorities to the body of Gwen Araujo. During the time of the murders, Michael was 22 years old. Jaren was 19 years old. Jose Merrill was also 22 years old and it is unknown how old Paul Merrill was. They were all initially arrested and charged with murder. But Paul was let go after Nicole and Emmanuel told police he had left with them. Michael, Jaren and Jose were charged with murder on October 17. Guerin pleaded guilty on February 24, 2003 to a lesser charge on voluntary manslaughter, in which he could be sentenced to 11 years and the promise to testify against the other 3 defendants. On August 11, 2006, Guerin received an 11-year sentence. However, he had credit for time already served and was expected to serve 5 years in jail from that point on. He was released from prison sometime before 2016. The first trial for Michael, Jose and Jason began on April 14, 2004 but ended in a mistrial on June 22. The second trial began on May 31, 2005. Michael and Jose were sentenced to 15 years in prison in January 2006 for second-degree murder, while Jason pleaded no contest to manslaughter on December 16, 2005. To avoid a third trial, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison, with credit for time already served. Jason was released from prison in July 2012. Jose was granted parole in 2016 with the support of Sylvia Guerrero, and Michael stated he was not ready for release at his parole board hearing in 2016. As his request for parole was opposed by Sylvia, he was denied parole again in September 2019. In the years since the murders, a judge posthumously changed Gwen's legal name to Gwen Amber Rose Araujo on June 23, 2004, at Sylvia's request, as Amber Rose is the name Guerrero had chosen before her child was born. As she did not know the gender of her unborn child, a health and social services program for transgender people called TransVision in Alameda County was founded in 2002 and operated by Tri-City Health Center after Gwen's murder. On the first anniversary of the murder, Horizons Foundation created the Gwen Araujo Memorial Fund for Transgender Education. The fund's purpose was to support school-based programs in the 9-county Bay Area that promote understanding of transgender people and issues through annual grants. Through this fund, Sylvia Guerrero and her family spoke in middle and high schools about transgender awareness and understanding. By 2005, Guerrero had spoken to more than 20 schools. The fund was closed sometime before September 2020. Sylvia Guerrero worked as a legal assistant at a San Jose law firm, but as of 2016 was homeless due to PTSD from the incident. Guerrero has been unable to return to work and now shuffles her belongings from relatives' houses, using a borrowed car from her friend. October 4, 2022 marks 20 years since the murder of Gwen Araujo. Gwen would be 37 years old if she was still alive today. Rest in peace, Gwen.